So thanks for coming today, and I thought we could all have a discussion at some point about what is intelligence. This is a question that's deeply interested me for almost my entire life. I would say as early as I can remember, I've been fascinated with why do people differ from each other? Why do some people that we seem to write off or fall between the cracks of the educational system then burst onto the scene and do incredible things? What have we missed out on there? These sorts of questions are questions that have fascinated me my entire life. And I do have a personal story and a reason why I got interested in this topic, and I'm going to be definitely dropping a lot of science on you all today, but I thought I'd start by, from a place of a personal story and just tell you a little bit of my own perspective coming into this situation. So for the first 3 years of my life, I had, this is a picture of me as a kid, I had a lot of ear infections. And I developed something called central auditory processing disorder, which is a specific learning disability that made it very difficult for me to process information in real time. So I was always a couple steps behind the rest of the kids in the mainstream classroom. And this was an indication to my teachers that I was pretty dumb, or as the term is used and still used today, a slow learner. And I was kept in special education. In 5th grade, I was bullied a lot. This is me being bullied in the bathroom in 3rd grade. I was asked to repeat 3rd grade, and I still follow that guy on Facebook to see what he's up to today, which is cool. But he seems he's doing very, very well. You know, and every year that went on, I feel like I kept retreating more and more into my own inner stream of consciousness, a world of fantasy. I created this imaginative world upon myself that no one saw, no one had access to. So I would, alone in my room, I would write stories about time travel. I would act out soap opera plot lines, you know, where I was like the leading man at age like 10, which is very weird, but I had all these like fantasies. Anyway, irrelevant. I was very imaginative, let's just say that. I was very imaginative at a very young age, and I had to keep it all to myself. And the biggest conflict that I experienced, which a lot of kids with learning disabilities experience, is sort of this identity of learning disabled can become integrated into your identity, into the essence of your core of your identity. And at the same time, that can be very confusing for kids who clearly are capable of intellectual challenges. But on the one hand, they feel, oh, I must be learning disabled, I can't handle this. On the other hand, it's like, well, I feel like I can actually handle some of this stuff. So it can create a lot of anxiety, and my self-esteem did get lower and lower. All the way up till 9th grade, I was kept in special education. And there was one day where I was removed from the regular classroom. It was a history class, and they removed you when it was test time, and they put you in the special room so you could take an untimed test. And I was like daydreaming, I don't know, maybe about my soap operas or whatever. Again, I was just like zoning out. And there was a teacher there that day who was covering for the regular special ed teacher, had never seen me before that day. So she just saw the child in front of her. And I saw her looking at me, and I saw her started walking towards me, and I started panicking. I was like, am I not acting learning disabled enough? And I was like, I started like scribbling on the history test, like, you know, like, and she's like, you know, I would really like to talk to you after class. And I talked to her after class. Well, actually, first she said, why are you not, you know, taking your untimed history test? I said, well, it's untimed the rest of my life to finish it, so what's the point? And she thought that was like smart thing to say. So anyway, after class, she took me aside and she said, look, I see your frustration. Actually, what she said is, I see you. And I think it's really important. This was the first time anyone prior to that moment in my life really took the time to look beyond this label. She didn't even know what my label was. She just was happened to be in that class that one day. And she said, why are you here? And why are you still here in special education? Have you thought about taking some more challenging classes? And I started to answer that question, and I realized I had no good answer to that question at all. No one had ever asked me that question before, so it never even dawned on me to think about that. And I started to think to myself, I said, you know what? Yeah, you're right. And it was like this light switch went off in my head. Like something completely switched in me. And I ran to the payphone, and I called my mom, and I said, Mom, I'm not reporting to special ed tomorrow. And she was like, what's going on right now? Where are you calling me from, first of all? You know, like, wait, we'll talk about this when you get home. And they were so supportive. My parents were so supportive, and the administrators, everyone was supportive. We set up this big meeting in my school district because no one's ever broken out of special ed before in my school district. So this was like, they didn't know nothing in their rule books for this. So they we had this big meeting with the administrator, the superintendent, everyone was there, and they said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to let you out on a trial basis. You know, because we want to cover our ass, right, if you fail, you know. And we were like, we told you so, you're going disabled, you know. But no, they're like, we're going to let you out, a trial basis. And they did. And I will say from that moment forward, I was just curious what my identity was. I was just curious, like that was really my most pressing concern at that moment was, who the hell am I, you know? And so I signed up for everything. I tried everything. I signed up and I failed in so many things, not like literally F grade, but I like clearly wasn't talented in a lot of things. Like I signed up to be a Latin scholar and that didn't work out too well. And the school musical like didn't work out so well, like the dancing aspects and things. But something that did work out really well. My grandfather was a cellist in the Philadelphia Orchestra for 50 years, and he has so many incredible stories and things. He was retired at this time, and the summer after I took myself out of special ed, I went right into the orchestra conductor. I had this moment of insight. I was like, you know what? I'm going to join the school orchestra. And I walked right into the orchestra conductor's room. He was alone in there, and I said, I want to join your orchestra in the fall. And he said, okay, what do you play? And I was like, well, I don't play anything yet. But by the start of the school year, I will play cello in your orchestra. And he didn't know me for anything. And he's like, you're like, what is going on right now? You know? And he's like, who's your teacher? And I said, Harry Goretzer, who was my grandfather in the Philadelphia Orchestra. He said, okay, sign up. You know, would he be able to give us lessons? You know, the other students lessons. You know, his wheels were turning, right? That maybe there's something in this for the orchestra too. So anyway, that summer, I must have practiced 8-9 hours a day. I was so driven to just show anyone that I was intellectually capable of anything. At this point, I didn't even like care what it was, you know, like I just wanted to just find something that I could show I was intellectually capable of doing. And it caught on really quickly. So I started learning on the cello really quickly, and I was really driven and passionate about this. And by the start of the school year, we had the first seating test. Do you know what a seating test is in orchestra, your placement in the orchestra? And the first seating test, I was not even last chair. I had beat someone who'd been playing since elementary school. However, I should preface that and say that she was probably tripping on acid during her audition, because she was like doing things with her bow that weren't relevant to the music. But I did. I won that one fair and square. And in the start of the school year, my grandfather came up with a composition with me where I played this first of each downbeat. So it wasn't the full. I still had the crutches on, right? But you know, I'd only been playing 3 months or 2 months. But I will say by 4 or 5 months into it, the crutches were off. By that point, I'd practicing 9-10 hours a day of that. But I practiced like, I like skipped classes. I practiced like not in the lunchroom. I didn't go to like lunch classes. I practiced in the orchestra room. I'm not saying this is psychologically healthy. I'm not saying you should promote this to any of your children. But I'm saying I was just driven. And I moved up, and by the end of senior year, I moved up to second cellist and won the all-department music department award, you know, because I was also in the choir and stuff. So things were going really well, and I wish like this was one of those stories where I could say like, and then it was just clear sailing from there, and then I won the Nobel Prize last week, you know. But no. And this is the point I want to make, is that every step of the way, every time I started to feel like good about myself, like I was like, oh, I'm smart, something would just hit me, like these stupid standardized tests would just keep coming back in my face. And so senior year, all my friends at this point were in gifted and talented education. I loved the things that they were doing. I was in honors classes by this point. I was getting straight A's, so no more trial basis for me by senior year. And I was like, you know what, I want to be in gifted and talented education because all my friends are in it and they get to do so many fun things. You know, they get to play with all these puzzles and like get to like discuss like Play-Doh and stuff. And I was like, this is cool. So I scheduled an appointment with the school psychologist, and I said, hey, well, first I walked in, he said, you need to leave and schedule an appointment first. So then I came back. Technically, that's what happened. So I came back, and by this point, he had looked at my files. So he had that time to actually see the real me, whatever that means. So he looked at the files, and he said, sit down. I was like, oh, God, I'm going to sit down for this. And I will never forget this moment. He pulled out a napkin and drew a bell curve on this napkin. And he said, look, here's the deal. He said all the way, he started at the right. He said, these are gifted children at the right here. And he started to move to the left a little bit. And he said, this is about average intelligence. And he said, look, your score at age 10, oh no, she moved to the left. He said, these are the athletes tend to congregate, to the left of the bell curve. And then he moved to the left a little bit. And he said, this is not what he looked like, by the way. It's not drawn to scale, but this is a cute cartoon I found. And he wasn't smoking. But he did this. He drew the bell curve, and he said, and he pointed where I was in the bell curve. He said, the fact is you're not gifted. I said, what are you looking at? He said, I pulled out your score when you were 10, and he said, intelligence doesn't change. And it was this moment in my life when I can honestly say there was a definitive moment where I knew what I wanted to study the rest of my life, And I protested just a little bit. I said, at what point does achievement trump potential, right? So you're looking at the 10-year-old score, but I'm getting straight A's in honors classes. At what point does that count? And he's like, don't talk all gifted to me, don't give me a logical argument, that's, you're not gifted, you're not allowed to make logical arguments. I was so frustrated. You can tell my frustration, the 17-year-old self comes back when I tell these stories, right? And so I ran to the library and I looked up, I wanted to learn everything about human intelligence. I was curious, why don't I have intelligence no matter what I do? Why am I not allowed to show people that I have? So I read this book and I read a chart. And I found the IQ that he pointed out to me on the graph, and it said highly unlikely to graduate high school. People in that IQ range. And I was like, fuck that. And I threw it down, and the secretary, the librarians tackled me, and they're like, learning disabled student acting up. And I was like, they still remembered me from 9th grade when I was still in special ed. I was like, I'm not in special ed anymore, guys. God, calm down. But it was really that moment. And I just want to, let's fast forward a little bit here because I just want you to know how much these standardized test scores really do matter. So I had getting straight A's, all honors. I applied to Carnegie Mellon University to study cognitive science to redefine intelligence. Got my rejection letter. Your SAT scores aren't high enough to go to Carnegie Mellon to redefine intelligence. That's irony. So what did I do? Well, you know what? I had this grit, right? I said, I'm going to do it. I don't care. I'm going to find a route into Carnegie Mellon's cognitive science program. So what did I do? Naturally, I auditioned for their opera program. They did not look at your SAT scores in the opera program. And I sang the shit out of Caro Mio Ben. I was like, go, or whatever. It's too loud for the microphone. But I was like, just get me into your fucking school. And they're like, oh, brilliant, brilliant. And they told my parents, this is the most gifted singer we've ever had, audition, blah, blah, blah. I was like, make sure they don't look at my SAT scores. So I was accepted, I got a scholarship, a partial scholarship for the opera program. And I took a psychology class. And sophomore year, as calmly as can be, I strolled into the psychology department. And the secretary was there. She was like, I think she might have been smoking or something. She was like, whatever. And I was like, hey, so I just took a course in psychology, and it just really interested me, and never knew that it would interest me so much. And I tried to pretend like I hadn't been hatching this plan for years. And I said, hey, do you think maybe I could add on a psychology minor? Because it's called foot in the door technique in social psychology, right? So I was like, I didn't want to start off with a major. I was like, hey, could I get a psychology minor? And she's like, no one's ever been this excited to be a psychology minor at Carnegie Mellon. She's like, just sign that form. Can you imagine how profound that moment was in my life? How much I've been denied and struggling, and all it came down to was finding a route to just sign a paper. There was this moment in my life where I feel like I peered into some window of reality that I was like, I want to make sure other kids don't go through this. And then I did transfer into the major just the next semester. I was like, oh, I love the minor so much. Can I be a major? And they're like, yeah, whatever. They're like, we have 500 psychology majors, just whatever. You can be another one. And I graduated, Phi Beta Kappa, whatever. And then a couple years ago, in 2000, I guess I'm getting old now. 2009, I graduated from Yale University with a PhD in cognitive psychology. So, despite my IQ probably never changing, although we have a scientist here who's dying to actually test me. He's like, I don't buy it. I want to test you. But I'm pretty convinced. My IQ has not changed. And my standardized test scores, that's not my bag. Everyone has their bag. My bag is creativity, imagination. But my bag, if you stick me in this room and you say, focus on things you don't care about, my mind starts daydreaming, and before I know it, time's up, and they say, you're stupid, and it's like, I'm like, what happened? What'd I miss? Okay, so for the remaining time today, I want to tell you the science of this. So I want to make very clear that my personal story, I'm not like the Punisher of the intelligence field. I'm not like going through there's not a personal vendetta to take down IQ and gifted children. In fact, very, very far from it. I've been a big advocate in gifted, talented education. I've been a big advocate of the proper utilization of these tools, of these methods. I don't say we need to do away with these tests, but what I've been trying to do scientifically is understand how can we better administer and evaluate these tests and other factors we can do to minimize kids falling between the cracks. At the end of the day, that's really what I care about the most, is minimizing the number of kids that fall between the cracks. So let me just review all these different factors today and elements that I think we really need to take seriously as a society if we want kids to stop falling between the cracks. And we should start with IQ because there's so many misconceptions about IQ. By the way, how much time do I have left? Just in my head, I know. I guess I could actually just tell the time, couldn't I? Okay, I could just look at the clock. That's all she did is looked at the same clock I could have looked at. I'm like, thank you. Okay, sorry. Sometimes when I get nervous, I forget that I can actually do simple things. Okay. And that's what happened to me in the IQ test, by the way. I was so nervous on these IQ tests. Okay, so let me start a little bit, tell you about intelligence and IQ and why sort of how we measure and think about these things is not in line with the latest science. So the original purpose of IQ testing was to identify students in need of alternative education, and that was it. That was the sole purpose of these tests. Alfred Binet, this Frenchman, was designed to come up with a task that would differentiate those that would need remediation versus those in mainstream education that could profit. It was not to identify the geniuses or the gifted children. That would only come when America took control of these tests. It was really, this is the original purpose. And today, the way we measure intelligence through these IQ tests is not radically different. So the items, some reshuffling here, some reshuffling there, but the basic way we measure intelligence on these IQ tests is some of the same basic kinds of cognitive functions that we measure. So what are some of these cognitive functions? You could think of an IQ test as like a potpourri of cognitive functions that we then average together to give you an IQ score. But it's a lot of different kinds of functions. It's like, has anyone taken the physical fitness test? Where they ask you to run around with an eraser. Anyone know that one? Or pull your chin up. And what you do find is you can take the average of all those things and come up with a general fitness. I guarantee you, if I'm failing on every single one of those, my general fitness is probably going to be. You can probably infer that my general fitness is low. And that's the logic of IQ testing. So they'll ask information like vocabulary, arithmetic kind of questions, comprehension. Like you'll read passages, and actually comprehension is right on SAT. So SAT, by the way, is a thinly veiled IQ test. If you didn't know that, the correlation between SATs, GREs, MCATs, LSATs, all these things is about as high as the reliability of IQ tests themselves. Okay, so that's a truth, a deep truth of reality here. So block design asks people to mentally rotate objects in their head. Picture arrangement, similarities, analogical reasoning, potpourri of different things. Even though it is a potpourri, there does seem to be something in common amongst all of these. So that people who do well on one of these tasks do tend to do well on other kinds of tasks. So there's a positive, what's called a positive manifold. And this here is you can think of it like a dartboard. These are all of these tests arranged along in a visual space, spatially related. And the closer these tests are, you guys can't actually read anything here, but I'll just say, the closer you get to the bullseye, that's the closer you're getting to measure that essence of IQ, the kind of mental ability that seems to pervade all the other items. And the farther away you get, the less so. So if you look outside the circle, you have simple perceptual speed or simple reaction time. How fast can you think? It turns out that simply looking at how fast people think, and simply looking at how fast they can react to things is not the best measure, doesn't get at the heart of what IQ is tapping into. But as you get closer and closer and closer, you get progressively more cognitively complex. And as you see here near the circle, all these things that congregate have to do with analogical reasoning, analogical type thinking. So you see paper folding, verbal analogies, letter series, arithmetic operations as well. So things that take up working memory, things you have to hold in working memory. And what's right in the bullseye? It's a free book for someone that can't read the screen but can tell me what's in the bullseye, and your name is not Rex Young. What's in the bullseye? So there's something called the Raven's Advanced Progressive Matrices test. Okay? And this test is supposed to be a really good measure of what's called fluid reasoning. Okay? And I'm going to test you all right now on your fluid reasoning. This is a moderate level difficulty one. Okay? So what you have to do is complete this pattern across, down, and one of the answer options is the answer, but it does complete the pattern. So spot the pattern amongst all of these geometric figures. You can raise your hand when you think you have the answer. Oh, what's the answer?
An arrow to the right.
So what number? If it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, then 5, 6, 7, 8. The bottom row is 5, 6, 7, 8. Yay! You are some excellent fluid reasoner. Excellent fluid reasoner. Okay, so this kind of gets to the essence. So people that are really good at on the spot spotting the pattern, right, tend to do well in all these other kinds of tests on the IQ tests. And it's interesting. So the question is, what is that? What is the essence of IQ? Those who have really high IQs, what is going on there? Well, it certainly is an important skill. I'm not at all claiming it's like that we need to downgrade it or belittle it. It's a very important skill. It's inference ability. It's abstract reasoning. But to do well on the spot, you have to have a good functioning executive attention network. Okay, and this is a brain region that, in fact, was discovered by someone in this room, Rex Young, over here. He has found that those who have really good, efficient, and reliable communication between these parts of the lateral frontal region of the brain and these parts of the lateral region of the parietal cortex, really fast communication, tend to do really well. They tend to have higher working memory capacity. They tend to be able to hold lots of different things in their mind at once and then integrate it. And that's why they tend to do well in IQ tests, because doing well in IQ tests, a lot of these items taps into that, right? So think about when you're trying to comprehend a complex passage of prose, right? You have to remember and hold in your mind prior sentences. And then as you keep reading, you have to hold this in mind, and then you have to integrate it or synthesize it. If you have really poor working memory, it's very hard for you to follow the threads, right? And you could see how it's an element of intelligence. But there's a lot of misconceptions about the stability of IQ. God bless you. So for instance, my colleague Kevin McGrew analyzed all of the contemporary IQ tests, and he found that on average, any particular individual can be expected for their IQ to change between 16 to 26 points, depending on what test they take. So this is a very important thing if we have really arbitrary thresholds about cutoff points without retesting or looking at a wider range of tests. But another assumption is that IQ is the best predictor of academic achievement. And it does do a good job of predicting academic achievement, but you have to understand what prediction means and what statistics mean, and this goes back to kids falling between the cracks. So on average, IQ test scores account for 40 to 50% of academic achievement, but that means that 50 to 60% of student achievement is not accounted for by this variable. So still today in this country, the predominant, most important measure admission criteria for entrance into gifted and talented programs, even for 5-year-olds in New York City up to this year when they made this monumental change where they got rid of it, is the use of IQ. But that doesn't take into account the fact there are so many kids who far exceed their academic performance based on the prediction of their IQ. And this is what I care about these kids. Like, I care about every single one of these dots that don't conform to our predictions. This is just a regression line based on looking at the relationship between your IQ score and what you're predicted to achieve based on that IQ score academically. And this shows that 50% underperform based on their achievement. This also shows that 50% overperform based on what's predicted based on their IQ. So the question is, well, what are what explains the rest of this variance, the rest of these individual differences? And this is something that I've become interested in, is these quote, they call them non-cognitive variables, but I don't think that's quite right. I don't think where are these variables coming from? They're not coming from like your nose or, like they're cognitive variables. They're just different parts of the brain than the executive attention network, right? But all these things have been shown to be incredibly important. So in one of the largest longitudinal studies of gifted children, following up really young to see who were really high academic performers, they found the students who had very high academic intrinsic motivation, that this was just as important a predictor as IQ. Okay? Now, there were kids with high IQs and lower academic intrinsic motivation, but they reached the same point as kids with lower IQs but higher academic intrinsic motivation. Okay? Obviously, the kid who's high in everything in the world, that's good, Like, I'm not saying that's like, but it's something to keep in mind, that you can get to the same pathway through different routes. That's the point I'm trying to make. So active learning strategies, a very hot area of research in cognitive science. Active learning strategies can be things simply as spending more time with the teacher after class, getting reinforcement, teaching to others, note-taking. There's so many things that students do, and my colleague Anders Ericsson has found that he's looked at journals of students in classes, and he found that the students who use more active learning strategies outperformed those with the higher SAT scores going into the classroom with low active learning strategies. So if we just have this IQ model of intelligence and learning, we're not really getting a good idea of what it actually takes to learn and to even have a joy of learning. So self-control, grit, self-regulation, these are all variables that are important. Social support in the classroom. In that longitudinal study I was telling you about with the gifted children, they found IQ, academic intrinsic motivation, and cognitively stimulating home environment were the three most important variables in predicting the development of high academic performance and giftedness. So these things need to work in tandem with each other. So it's bad to just isolate one of these variables from the rest of these. So and also this is something that interests me as well, is the underrepresentation of minority students and ethnic minorities, and it's a serious problem. We're talking, by serious, we're talking like something like 90% of kids in gifted and talented programs in America are white, middle to upper class. Do you mean to tell me that those are the only kids that are really brilliant in our country? No. They're definitely not. And I think a lot of this comes down to environmental factors and cognitive stimulating home. If you're in a very poor environment where you just want to survive that day and not be like shot, right? We need to take these priorities, we need to take these things into account when we're trying to look at what someone's intellectually capable of. So that's academic achievement. Let's just take like a deep breath for a moment. Okay, cool. Thank you for doing that with me. I think that as parents, how many of you are parents? Oh my gosh, this is a perfect audience. Okay. I think as parents, correct me if I'm wrong, but what you really care about is not how the kid does on a standardized test, but whether or not they're going to live a personally meaningful, satisfying, creative life. Right? Am I right? Like if I was presented to you, the administrator, and I presented you with these two options, and I said, I can get your kid to get the highest scores and win National Merit Scholar, or I could guarantee that your kid is going to find his niche in life, be really happy, not have low levels of depression and anxiety, have very high levels of well-being, and feel very creatively fulfilled. Which would you pick, right? So what I've become much more interested in the past couple of years is what are the characteristics that predict that? Like what predicts that? That matters to me. And to really understand this, we have to go back to a seminal study that is often forgotten because it was conducted so long ago, but I just keep trying to revive it. It's by E. Paul Torrance, who's a great creativity researcher. In the 50s, he wondered just that question. What are the best predictors of lifelong creative achievement, publicly recognized creative achievement, as well as personally satisfying, fulfilling creative achievement? So he went to 3 public schools, and he measured Every kid, one of these kids, he gave them IQ tests. He gave them measures of, he came up with the Torus test of creativity, which is like how many uses are there for a brick and kind of things like that. He came up with, he measured their personality. He interviewed them. He took the time to really get to know these kids. And he followed these kids up 30 years into it when he passed away. But researchers have just published a couple of years ago the 50-year follow-up. Okay, so we have a good idea what predictors were the best in from elementary school. And these were some of the characteristics that he found differentiated the beyonders. He referred to the beyonders, those who 30 years later were actually doing it, creatively achieving, versus the sociometric stars, which he had every kid in elementary school rate who's most likely to succeed in life. Okay? The yearbook thing? He tested it empirically. He's like, and he found that the sociometric stars were not the beyonders. Okay? There was some overlap, but very little overlap. He found these were the characteristics that were the strongest differentiators between the beyonders and the sociometric stars. Love of work, persistence, having some sort of purpose, deep thinking, tolerance of mistakes. And some of these kids, it didn't all have to happen in elementary school, so they may have found that by in high school some of these kids started showing these characteristics. But nevertheless, these are ones that predicted 30 years later. Openness to change, risk-taking, feeling this one is a really well-replicated finding that he found in his sample. He just simply asked kids, are you comfortable in your classroom if you have an idea and everyone else doesn't agree with you? Are you comfortable being a minority of one? And he coded this, yes, no, 1, 0. Looked at the statistical analysis, found that the kids who said, hell yes, I'm okay being comfortable in minority one, were higher creative achievers like 30 years later. Some of the most simple things, we go through all this complex, IQ, some simple things are like, are you okay, like, do you have a purpose? Simple things that we can get at. We really can assess, we can evaluate these things. But I will say there was one variable he found stood head and shoulders above all of these on this list, was the best predictor of lifelong creative achievement. And free copy of Ungifted, you can guess what it is. No one has ever guessed it yet in any of my talks. And yet after I say it, everyone's like, that's so obvious. I'm like, well, no one's ever said it. Yeah. Well, that's up here. So it's none of, so I'm trying to be dramatic, so I didn't put it on this list, right? So, yeah. I like that. That wasn't it, but I like that one. I like that one. Yeah. Action? No, but that was part of the list. Yeah.
Willing to fail?
Nope.
Can you repeat them because we can't hear them?
All of these?
No.
Oh my God, you're testing my working memory now? Willingness to fail was the last one in the sequence. Yes. Competitive. Willingness to fail. Passion. Yes. Empathy. No, so none of these. Yeah.
Visualization.
I gave you two chances. And you were like, yet your second one was like, it's actually like almost hit the nail on the head. But no. You're the closest. You got the closest. By the way, this shows the value of retesting, right? Yeah.
I'm in the middle of the
Yeah. No, that would have been interesting. You know what's really funny? I gave a talk here once, and someone raised their hand, and they said, was it IQ? And I was like, that would have been so funny if that was what it was. I could be like, drop the mic, done. That would have been the biggest irony of my whole talk. Let's just get one more, yeah.
conceptualization.
Oh, this is close. So no, none of these. What he found is that the kids who, at a really young age, fell in love with a future image of themselves. Simple as that. Head and shoulders above all the other variables. It drove them throughout their life to realize that vision. So this is the paper that he wrote, one of my favorite papers, which I don't know why it doesn't get cited more, but he wrote this toward the end of his life, and he became quite convinced this was one of the most important factors. He said, life's most energizing and exciting moments occur in those split seconds when our struggling and searching are suddenly transformed into the dazzling aura of the profoundly new, an image of the future. One of the most powerful wellsprings of creative energy, outstanding accomplishment, and self-fulfillment seems to be falling in love with something, your dream, your image of the future. And there is more modern-day cognitive neuroscience research shows that the brain network that supports that is not the brain network that supports IQ. It's this network. This is dubbed by scientists the default mode network, but I like to refer to it as the imagination network because it's much sexier. The imagination network comprises areas of the medial, frontal, and parietal and temporal lobe, various areas of the brain, but deep inside the brain. This is really interesting. So just think about this as saying it's kind of neat how evolution designed us, or how God designed us, or whatever, whoever designed us. So you have, you think about it, the ability to concentrate on the outside world, the ability to focus, seems to be associated with the lateral parts of the brain on the outside. But a lot of our ability to really get in touch with our inner stream of consciousness, our fantasies, our deeply personal memories, that resides in the medial, though those areas are recruited in the medial part of the brain. The medial part is, if you were, and no one do this, but if you were to cut my brain open and look, at the, right down the middle line, right? So I think that's it. I personally find that very interesting. I don't even know, do neuroscientists find that interesting? Yeah, it's cool, right? It's like the way we're designed is that these parts are the less easier to see on fMRI scans or whatever, but these are the ones that are associated with the following functions. In the recent years, all of these cognitive functions have been associated with this brain network. And keep in mind, this brain network is not what we're exercising or tapping to by our modern day education, okay, by our focus on standardized testing and IQ and academic performance. We're not exercising these functions. So what I want to propose, this question I want to pose to you all today, and you may disagree with me, but do these things belong in the realm of human intelligence? I argue they do. You may disagree, and I'm more than happy for people to disagree with me, but I just want to raise that question. So let's go through this list. Mind wandering, daydreaming, imagining and planning your personal future, self-awareness, reflective compassion. So thinking about the plight of someone else in a reflective way is tapped into by this brain network. Reasoning about moral dilemmas, reading fiction, retrieving deeply personal memories, like memories of your first kiss, memories of winning, whatever. You know what a personal memory is. I don't need to give you more examples. Okay, I don't need to give you any more of my own personal examples here. It's going to quickly get embarrassing. Okay. By the way, I'm a big daydreamer, and this always happens to me when I give talks. Is that comes out? That side of me comes out. Okay. Evaluation of social and emotional implications of another person's situation. Monitoring one's emotional state. By the way, I would argue all these things are cognitive abilities. Right? I mean, being able to reason about the plight of another person and really deeply understand why that matters in a conscious way, why is that a non-cognitive trait? We have such a bias in this culture against things that aren't academic concentration for other people's goals, to put it bluntly, right? But what about things that that can stem from our own inner stream of consciousness, our own self, and that allow us to imagine what's going on out there in the world, right? What about those functions? Why is that not cognitive? Reflective consideration of the meaning of your own experiences, okay? So when you're reflecting on the meaning of your experiences and you're trying to construct a sense of yourself, that's not the executive attention network. That's this brain network. Mentally simulating the perspective of another person. Now this is probably one of the most I think important implications of the latest neuroscience of this stuff is that in a lot of ways, research shows the more that we demand people's external attention, which is what we do in the classroom by saying, focus on this lecture, not giving them time to get in touch with this brain network, we're actually underdeveloping these skills. Okay? We're systematically underdeveloping these skills by demanding people's external attention all the time. Okay, and I'm not the only one making this argument by any stretch of imagination. My colleague Mary Helen Imardino Yang is an excellent cognitive neuroscientist who's been looking at this as well and has found that these brain networks seem to toggle sometimes. They can work in cooperation when we allow them to, right? When we say, okay, now I want you to take all of your concentration abilities, all of that executive attention network, but guess what? I want you to apply it to something personally meaningful, Then you do see these brain networks come together. But the way that we have created our educational system is that we've disassociated artificially these brain networks that desperately want to work together. Okay? So for the remaining time today, I thought I'd present a new theory of intelligence. Why not? Okay, look, I'm not claiming this is like a brilliant theory or that I'm revolutionizing the world here, but I will say this is a dream come true for me, right? That day, I sat there in that chair, and that school psychologist said, "You're not intelligent. It doesn't matter what you do. As long as your IQ score doesn't change, you're not intelligent." I knew that something wasn't quite right, that we need a broader definition. So I'm just going to present my theory of personal intelligence today, just to stimulate thought, maybe think about these things in a different way. But of course, feel free to be like, "That's total shit, Scott," or whatever. Like, it's cool. It's cool. I'm used to it. I'm used to it. Okay. So this is what I think. I think we focus too much on individual differences. And what I mean by that is that intelligence researchers for the past 100 years have been very interested in saying, how does this person differ from this person? But what we've neglected is within-person variation, okay? The human development of an individual and how these traits develop not relative to other people, but relative to their past self and their future self, and relative to their own personal goals. Is it that crazy to say that I think we should actually take into account the person's goals if we're trying to judge their intelligence and what they're capable of achieving? It doesn't seem like it's such a crazy thing to argue. So I define intelligence here as the dynamic interplay of engagement and ability in pursuit of personal goals. In this world, this theory, the focus is on just you, okay? Your intelligence, individual intelligence, personal intelligence. And all that exists is all of these behaviors and intelligent behaviors across your lifespan from prior to future. And here's some major tenets of this theory. Some of these tenets may seem obvious, but you'd be surprised how much we ignore these tenets in an educational environment. So one is that every child is actually a whole person, believe it or not. And what I mean by a whole person is not just simply like, oh, Johnny's, just 1/3 of a person, like he just, whatever. Okay, I mean, we each have a dynamic system of cognitive, emotional, personality, motivational processes, and these things are a system. Okay, when we isolate one variable and we just hold it up there and ignore the rest of the context of that system. So let's say we just take IQ, for instance, and we say, all else being equal about that person, this kid has a higher IQ, so he's going to do better in life, and he's going to do better in scores, so then therefore let's give all the resources to him. What I would argue is that by doing that, so many kids are going to fall between the cracks because of this context of the rest of that system. So many different traits can compensate for other traits. People can reach the same outcome through a different constellation of unique characteristics. And my research has bore that out. So I'm not just saying that off the fly. There's another research has shown that as well. So each one of us is a dynamic system, and all of these components of the system are also mutually reinforcing. So I think we underestimate the extent to which they all feed off each other. So for instance, if you're in an environment where you're feeling anxious, that's one part of the system, right? Do you think your cognitive ability is going to be full potential, full use? What if you're put in a special education classroom and you feel every day of your life as though everyone in that room thinks you're stupid, okay? Do you think you're going to perform to your best performance of what you're capable of intellectually? No, you do actually find that anxiety decreases working memory capacity, which is the thing that's most essential for this kind of IQ kind of reasoning. So we're all system. The second major tenet is there are actually many dimensions. So the thing is, Americans decided, there was one person in particular, Louis Terman, who when he found these IQ tests from France, he was so excited to put it to use to measure gifted children. And that's not by itself a bad thing, right? So there are kids that are also falling between the cracks because they're bored out of their minds in the classroom, or they're ready for 5 grades ahead, right? And they deserve resources. So there's nothing absurd about that. But what he did is he focused too much on one variable. The truth is that there are so many ways that everyone in this room differs from each other, and you can be up the kazoo on any one of those traits. You can be gifted in any one of these traits. There could be people in this room, raise your hand if you feel like you're 2 standard deviations above the mean in passion for something in this world. Okay, why should we ignore that? It turns out that in the latest survey of gifted and talented education, and I've written a lot about this, in the latest survey, there was I think one state that considered motivation an important aspect of giftedness. Okay? Only one state in this country. Okay? So clearly that's not considered at all relevant to students who are ready, who could benefit from more advanced resources. So let me just go through the many flavors of giftedness. Any one of these areas, kids can be extremely high on, and they deserve support and resources as well as any other kids. High fluid reasoning, which I already showed you, pattern inferencing making, those kids do, because those kids do tend to be very good at math. Those kids do tend to be very good at physics. You do find a very strong correlation between that and those kinds of fields. But visual spatial giftedness, not something that's measured well in SATs. And some of my colleagues, like Jonathan Y., have argued that, no, we need to, that's important. Visual spatial engineers, that kind of designers, things like that, we're not picking up on that. Verbal giftedness, creative giftedness. So again, like only a handful of gifted and talented programs consider creativity, creative cognition, separately from IQ. It's almost like we're assuming that all these things just come along for the ride if you have a high IQ. Like everything in the world just comes along for the ride. And that's not the case. These are separable, partially separable abilities. Emotional giftedness, also known as compassion. Okay? What about the kid who wants to, from a very young age, has a vision of the future self they fall in love with in elementary school, and that vision is, I want to cure cancer, or I want to cure world hunger. Okay? Do you see any logical reason why we need to administer an IQ test to that person to allow them to realize that dream? Like this is clearly a compassionate human being that all we need to do is give them like ways to express that compassion, right? We don't need to limit that person. Motivational giftedness. This is actually, that longitudinal study I was telling you about those, that they followed up the gifted kids and they found that the 3 most important factors was academic intrinsic motivation, cognitively stimulating home environment, and IQ. Remember I told you about that study? Well, they argue that motivational giftedness should be a form of giftedness, okay? So if you have a kid that comes to you and they are like way beyond the pale in their determination to realize a goal, why should we hold those kids back if they don't score above a certain threshold in an IQ test? I actually see it as immoral to hold them back. I actually go that strong to argue that it's immoral. Determination, giftedness, okay, so you get the idea, right? So many ways that people, and anyone that's beyond the pale or anyone that could benefit from resources that we could offer in the school, I think we should be able to offer those resources to them. So I am a big advocate, again, I am a big advocate of gifted and talented education. What I think is we need is a more inclusive gifted and talented education. So that's my fundamental argument. Third tenet, engagement and ability, inseparable. Again, you pull just IQ or you pull just academic performance away from engagement, and you miss out on the fact that these things feed off each other constantly. Okay? So I define engagement as an active, deep, and personally meaningful connection between the student and the person's learning environment. This is something I don't think that we, in public schools at least in this country, we do a very good job engaging students to have a personally meaningful connection with the material. But these things are inseparable. So the more our interests and our passions, it directs us to relevant information in our environment. It causes us to want to pay attention, right? So the link from a cognitive science perspective, the link between passion and attention is so intertwined, and I don't think we fully really utilize that aspect of cognitive science in our schools. And our continual engagement, that's what builds up this knowledge base that then feeds off each other, right? So you find that like really mathematically gifted kids in like high school or whatever, I mean, they started very, very young. They were like really, really passionate about numbers at a young age, and they like juggling numbers and everything. But they build up they clock so many hours through their deep engagement with this stuff. And then, so of course, you get, 5, 10 years later, and you're like, you're a genius, you were born that way, when like, what was born that way? Well, I'm not saying there was nothing born that way. I'm not saying that there's no such thing as talent, but there's no such thing as innate talent. Okay, so Michael Jordan didn't pop out of his mother dunking from the free throw line. Like all of us, all traits and characteristics are developed. There are no exceptions. No one has found any exceptions to this yet, in terms of the psychological traits realm. So the question is, well, how can we use that information to recognize that the seeds of talent really is this passion and attention aspect, right? You look at prodigies. I've studied prodigies. I've studied savants, all sorts of special populations, and you see across the board the common factor is not some sort of innate talent, but some sort of really early attentional focus on a domain or something, okay? And lots of different factors increase student engagement, such as letting people feel like they relate more, that they belong more, they have more autonomy. These are all environmental factors that can increase student engagement. Competence, need for flow, so we match. And this is why gifted and talented education is really important, because the less you match students to their current ability level and what they're ready for, the less you're going to let them engage in the full experience. The more likely they are going to be bored, tuned out. You know, a recent survey of high school dropouts, they found that 50% dropped out because they weren't being challenged enough. It's not, you know, so we have a big problem in this country about challenging kids who could actually benefit from that. And expectations matter. I think that's obvious, that expectations can shut, if you have low expectations, it shuts down your working memory functioning. And I think inspiration matters a lot. Psychologists have started to study inspiration in my field of positive psychology, has found three major qualities of inspiration. One is that inspiration seems to be something that's spontaneous and without intention. It's something you encounter a stimulus and you become inspired. There's all the more reason why I think we need to have kids interact more with inspiring role models, inspiring curriculum, show them as many different aspects as possible. It's transcendent, so people who become inspired seem to have a purpose or some vision that goes beyond their self-serving concerns they used to have in their life, and they seem to be approaching. They want to approach or strive to transmit or express or actualize their vision. And researchers have found that inspiration is a game changer. They've done before and after pictures of like weight loss and stuff. They've done before and after pictures of inspiration. And you do find they had people like walk around beepers all during their day, and they're like, "Are you inspired yet? Are you inspired yet?" You know, not something like that. You know, and they'll beep them at various times, and they'll take these tests. And then they find that the kids who before they're inspired, they may look dumb, they may look unengaged, unenthusiastic, they may look even learning disabled. But you find that inspiration buys you a complete change in your perceived competence of what you're, and I highly recommend this reference. If you email me, I'll send you any of these articles. But you see a huge change in self-determination. Suddenly you feel freer in your life. You're like, oh my God, there's all these possibilities. You feel more competent. You feel more absorbed in a specific thing, like, oh, this is my thing. I'm going to become absorbed in it. And finally, potential is a constantly moving target. Potential is not something that you're just born with, stamped in your forehead, and we do tend to think of innate talent and potential that way. It turns out that the more you engage in something, the more potential grows. So we need to focus on the engagement aspect, because and everything will flow. Not everything, but a lot will flow from there. So, for instance, let's say I weighed 500 pounds right now, and I said, "Do you think I can win what's my potential of winning the Boston Marathon next week?" You know, if you're a high school guidance counselor, you're like, "Be realistic. Don't even try applying," right? But let's say I engaged in a weight loss program. I got on the Biggest Loser TV show. I lost 400 pounds. Let's say 10 years from now, fast forward, I came to you. I said, what's my potential of winning the Boston Marathon? You'd be like, oh my gosh, I think you have a good chance, right? Well, what has changed there, right? So I have fundamentally changed those odds. That's all potential is odds. I've changed those odds through engagement. So that's why I think we need to really think of potential as nothing more, nothing less than readiness for engagement at any one moment of time. If we shift our whole culture from thinking about potential as something that you're born with to just at any moment of time, it's what you're ready to engage in, that would, I think, open up opportunities for so many kids who are ready for it, but who we arbitrarily limit. So finally, at the end of this talk today, I want to tell you what I'm doing to, like, oh, I always mess up this expression. Put my money where the mouth is? No. What am I putting? Oh, so one of these days I'm going to get that right. I'm going to walk the talk. How about that? Okay. So I was recently hired by the founder of the field of positive psychology, Martin Seligman, to be the scientific director of the Imagination Institute. We launched Tuesday. That's cool that you're applauding about that. That's cool. And this is the website that, don't look at it till Tuesday because it's in like draft mode right now, but you can be one of the first ones in the world to have this. Okay, this is our official logo. This is a kind of model. We're interested in all of the. This is also done in conjunction with not only Marty Seligman, but a great creative researcher, Marie Foriard, who was a grad student of Marty's. And this is a model we're sending to BBS, a journal, where we argue there's these different kinds of mental processes, and all of them are important to scientifically study. From imagination, which is just a mental representation of something that doesn't exist in your current environment, to perspection, which is actually thinking about your future, to originality, which is mental representations of the future that are original, right? So I could just have a thought of like, oh, what am I going to eat for breakfast tomorrow? But would you say that's original? Not particularly. So original is something different. And then creativity. Creativity folds all these things in one, okay? Creativity has to be useful as well as imaginative, creative. And then innovation is creativity taken on a large scale. So we're sending out an RFP on Tuesday, giving out $3 million worth of money to anyone who wants to take on the challenge of studying one of these aspects and helping us come up with an imagination IQ test. So our goal in the next 3 years is to come up with an imagination IQ test, right? For the I to maybe mean imagination once and for all, than just intelligence, okay? Another major aim of the Imagination Institute is to intersect with educators. Did anyone ever go on the ride Journey into the Imagination at Epcot Center? With the Figgy, this purple dinosaur. So that's actually called the Imagination Institute. And it was like my favorite ride growing up. And there was something called the Dreamcatcher. It always resonated with me, this idea of the Dreamcatcher. And there's an educational organization that I've been working with that's partnering very closely with us called the Future Project. And this is their website up here. What they've done is this is the mission. We imagine a world where any student anywhere can put a dream into action. And what they've done is they've hired a full-time position in the schools called the Dream Director. Okay? It's not your standard guidance counselor. If any are guidance counselors in this room, I have deep respect for guidance counselors, but most of them, if you go to them and say, I want to do this, they'll say, be realistic, But the Dream Director, if you, let's say you're doing well and you say, I want to go to Yale, they'll say, well, maybe we should. But the Dream Director, you go into the Dream Director's office and you say, this is my dream. And the Dream Director immediately says, great, so let's do it. Let's get you there. There's no holding the student back. There's no saying, let's measure your IQ to see whether or not you're allowed to have a dream. Like no dream for you if you're below a 130 cutoff. It's immediately, what can we do to get you there? So they pair the students up with a mentor from the community. The amount of applications of these coaches, these dream coaches, is just unbelievable. And we can only select a very small number. So we're getting cream of the crop right now of dream directors and coaches that are really interested in applying the principles of positive psychology, applying the principles of the way of psychology to really get the best out of these students. And the dream director's role is also to inspire the rest of the kids in that school and to change the culture of the school. Okay, so the goal is not just to influence every single child, but for the entire culture of that school. Every single place the child goes, they see things on the wall. What inspires you? Tell your dream director today. I mean, it's completely transformative. I just want to show you a really quick video of what a dream director looks like, so you have an idea.
What does it take to direct a dream?
This is okay, I'll shut up for a second.
To catch a pie-in-the-sky vision and bring it down to earth. To keep a dreamer's feet on the ground and still remind her always to look up. What does it take to see greatness in what others write off? To look at a near dropout and see the next Walt Disney. A future Rosa Parks in the hallway rebel. To find, in the pair of eyes gazing out the window, the next Galileo. What does it take to shake up a school? To see the one great thing no one has before. In the chipped paint and in the broken lockers. In the cracks and stains that all say this is a place that has really lived. What does it take to inspire a generation? Someone to show students how to stay up late perfecting something no one will ever see. To plan the rally, build the stage, paint the signs, write the speeches, then stand back and watch with pride as they discover it for themselves. What will you do to direct a dream?
Absolutely incredible transformations in these kids. It's not that if they say, I want to cure cancer, that if they don't cure cancer in the high school that they failed, right? It's that every step they take towards realizing that future vision, they see a transformation in these kids, in their academic performance, in their attendance, everything else. It keeps going back to that Torrance variable. Now, I personally can attest to the power of inspiration. In 9th grade, before that moment, my identity was learning disabled. I didn't think I was capable of anything. And when that teacher challenged me, it changed changed everything, challenged me to question my hierarchy in the school system. It changed everything. Now, when I was writing my book, Ungifted, I was researching. I wanted to seek her out because I had not seen her after that day. I thought I was convinced she was a ghost, actually. I had not seen her. I only saw her that one time. And so with the help of with a gifted teacher at my, oh, by the way, I left out a part of the story. The gifted teacher felt so bad that I was rejected from gifted education. She let me in as an undercover gifted student. So that story is in my book. Yeah. Anyway, so there's a happy ending to that. You know, we just didn't tell the rest of my friends. So I came out as ungifted amongst my best friends in this book. Anyway, I researched and I found her, and she immediately responded to my email. She's like, "Oh, were you that black-haired kid that I almost lost my job over?" You know, no, but she was joking. But she invited me to her school, and this is me and her a couple years ago. She was principal of a school in Media, Pennsylvania, a middle school, and I gave a talk to her kids, the kids that are learning disability, and told them to be, the number one message I have for these kids is to be your own darn self-advocate. Okay, don't let the expectations of the rest of these teachers limit what you're capable of achieving. So I just want to say that the most important shift I think we could make in our culture is from a shift of obsessive need to evaluate potential, right, to actually inspiring people to want to realize the potential that's already within them. Thank you. I'm happy to answer questions, but I know time's up. So
Unfortunately, we've got to scramble to get
outside,
So
yeah.
you can do some outside Q&A, and then we're going to have a book signing.
Yeah.